Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this edition of Sport Walk on Socialist Telly. I'm going to make a quick housekeeping announcement at the beginning of this. We had somebody thinking they were doing this who published the link of this meeting on Twitter, and we have lots of people trying to log in and take part, and I'm having to kick them out. They keep trying to come back in again. So, if you're watching this, please don't come in. We have a full house now, and you might stop a guest getting in, but the program should proceed without problem now anyway. And if you're trying to get in, just watch it on the social media feeds, and you'll be able to participate there through the comments as per usual. So I'm delighted to be joined this week by an eminent panel, including two of my colleagues from Socialist Telly, Bonnie Craven and Cornish Damo, Kerno Damo now, aren't you, mate? Damien Woolley, and two great trade unionists, Paul Holmes, the elected but not yet official president of the Unison Union, and Ian Hodson, the president of the Bakers Union, which has been in the news in the last couple of weeks for disaffiliating from the Labour Party. So good evening, everybody. I will just point out, as I mentioned at the start, if you want to comment, you can. Twitter is not accepting comments at the moment that feed through onto the program, but Facebook and YouTube are. So if you want to get a question in and see if we can field it with the panel, then get your words in there, and we will do what we can to feed through as many as we possibly can. So thank you for your time, and if you want to do some catch up later on, then thank you for that, and do make sure that you share it all and give everybody the maximum chance to actually see what's going on and hear from our great panel this evening. Bonnie, we'll give you a quick word first, if you like, as to what you've been seeing going on. And I think there was a little comment in from somebody on the about the program before it started that you may want to address, but I'll leave that up to you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, I mean, as a woman on this panel, I'm very aware of what it's like to be in the minority within the trade union movement. It's across the piece. The number of women joining trade unions recently has reached the highest proportion of new members, which is good progress, but there's still a lot more work to do, because it still stands at only just over 26% of new members are women. So obviously, as a trade unionist, I'm working really hard to make sure that more women join trade unions, and that is reflected through the lay structure of the trade union. But also, as a woman, you look around and you look to see how many leaders of trade unions are women. Obviously, the bakers is one great example. UC is another example where there are women that have risen to the top of the trade unions. But another minority that is woefully underrepresented in trade unions at the moment is people who are Black and minority ethnic. We did get a comment this afternoon, about this being an all-white panel. And all I can say is, sadly, that's quite a reflection of what we see at the top of our trade unions. For example, I can think of one general secretary of a trade union, which is the NASUWT, which is a teaching trade union, where the general secretary is Black. We need to do a lot more to get more equal representation. The people at the top of our trade unions and everyone through the lay structure really needs to start representing the membership, obviously. And I know that a lot of trade unions are putting programs in place to help ensure that the structures are representative of the workforce and of the wider membership.
Well said. And I will say as well, we did have another couple of women guests lined up for this evening who have unfortunately had to drop out at the last minute. So that's why we have a slightly unbalanced panel, more than we would normally attempt to have. Ian, must have been a busy couple of weeks for you guys with the with everything around the disaffiliation after the conference, etc. I mean, tell us a little bit about how that's been going for you.
I mean, obviously, yeah. I mean, people are very keen to understand why the unions disaffiliated. And obviously, what response there's been from the Labour Party. Well, I mean, from our perspective, the position was one that we felt was, one we had to make, which was to say to the Labour Party, you no longer represent our interests. The situation around Andy MacDonald, for example, being told to resign for having the audacity to call for £15 an hour and support the aims and objectives of members to reach that, and then subsequently finding himself having to resign, even though Keir Starmer had told all the trade unions that he was open on shifting that, demonstrated to our membership that the insincerity of what Keir Starmer stands for and what the new Labour position is in relation to workers' rights. And we've seen it in the way they've treated their own staff. And I see tonight, there's more exposures coming out where they haven't released a Ford report. There wasn't any smoking gun that was that they was confirmed in a court hearing, but yet they're now naming people that they have decided are going to be the victims of this situation. And obviously from our perspective as a trade union, it's our intention to get even more political than we were before. We're not going to stop being political. We will build political movements across the country. We will be, working in communities, and we will be building political links with people that represent our interests. But as far as we're concerned now, the Westminster political bubble doesn't represent the interests of working class communities, and it's our job to make sure that the change that we build is built on what our members and the people that we will be working alongside want to say. And if politicians want to be relevant in the future, then they're going to have to understand we're no longer going to dance to their tune. It's time for them to dance to ours.
Music to my ears, dance music. Paul, you've lots of things going on in Unison at the minute, and seismic shifts that the management are frantically trying to combat. I mean, tell us what you can about what's going on inside Unison at the moment.
Well, I think what's going on inside Unison started with the General Secretary campaign, and it started with the slate that we put up in the NEC elections called Time for Real Change in Unison. Because the one thing I noticed speaking at 46 hustings meetings in the General Secretary campaign was that nobody was satisfied with the union. If you wanted to say this is the best union in the world, you wouldn't get much of a reception from speaking to the people who were seeking to nominate candidates. And so I think, I took a lot of notice what Bonnie said at the beginning of the meeting. But of the 36 people elected on the slate, Time for Real Change, 26 were women. 72% of that slate were women. And that's reflecting real change. And they weren't people on 70, 90 and £130,000 a year. They were people reflective of the sort of people that Ian's talking about. And if I had one slogan really about a lot of people in the movement at the top of it, is you don't get it. You don't understand what life's like for ordinary working class people. And I heard this the other night, I thought it was such a good quote, I'm going to use it in every speech to make now, which is that, they were talking about the things that we're interested in, like the nationalised industries, getting rid of outsourcing, the minimum wage. And this lad said, you've got to understand that the nationalised industries were working class universities, that in the 70s, 80s and 90s, millions of working class people that had a skill, being an electrician or a fitter or a plumber, had learnt that in the nationalised industries. The training had been free, their apprenticeships had been free, whether they worked in the private or the public sector, and they ended up as a skilled worker on a decent wage. And I don't like saying this on this programme, but Boris Johnson were right last week when he said we've got to stop being a low-skilled, low-wage economy. The difference between us and him is he doesn't mean it, and I do mean it. And a lot of schools in Wakefield, where I live, the ambitions of the parents and the children is not to go to university. It's to get a skilled job and get a decent rate of pay. I'm not ignoring university. That's the same thing. How many people now, nurses, for example, would have trained as a nurse 20 years ago for nothing, and now we're training at personal cost of £50,000. We've got a national education service and we've got people paying sums of money that are pool swings to train themselves. And that's the big change, I think, that's taking place. Unless you're prepared to give out a load of money from Europe to borrow it, then you're not going to get a decent paid job. And how can we be opposing £15 an hour minimum when you can get, or making £20 cuts off universal credit, you can get £162 a day logging into the House of Lords. That's all you have to do, log in, and you get £162. That is £8,000 a year. It's roughly the state pension. You get that for logging in on a computer. What is going on? People are suffering, and nobody's reflecting that suffering. And what's going on at the moment, whether you're trying to get people suspended here or suspended them there, or the most common tactic, keep them off the ballot paper, that's the most common tactic. An old bloke once said to me, the problem is not winning the election, Paul, it's getting on the ballot paper. And I think what we need now, and Ian reflects it, and hopefully I reflect it, Matt Rapp reflects it, is people who understand that we should be talking about pensions of £25,000 a year like they have in Germany, or £20,000 a year like they have in France. People are eking out an existence. And it's my final point on this stage of the programme. I did a little study of the EU vote. Of the 54 seats that Labour lost in England and Wales, 52 voted leave. 52 voted leave. There's only 2 that didn't vote leave. The reason for that is it's a measure of suffering. If you look at the league tables of the income per council in Britain, and you look at the league table of the education results and the EU results, they're the same league table. The poor people are down at the bottom in Knowsley and Hull, and the top people are up at the top in Kensington and Westminster. They're the same league tables, and everybody understands that. Everybody understands it. And what Ian says is spot on. We've got to reflect the people that we represent, not the incomes that some people are getting at this moment in time. And that's why our union wanted to change, because the average wage of a Unison member is £21,000. It's not the wage of the MPs. You look at some of the members' interests registers in Parliament, and the £89,000 they get as an MP is chicken feed compared to some of the other incomes. We need to talk about the incomes, standard of living and prospects of ordinary working people.
Thanks, Paul. That's brilliant. I'll just say welcome to Nicholas Nico, who has joined us. He was held up with baby stuff, I imagine, and has no doubt made huge sacrifices to get here. So welcome on that. Nick, I don't know how much of the discussion you've been able to hear while you've been trying to get it logged into the to the session, but were you, what have you heard? What do you make of it?
Just a bit. I'm afraid I just managed to catch a little bit about from Paul was saying. So yeah, I mean, I'd like to talk about what we can do to campaign for services, the NHS in particular, and how it needs to be outside the Labour Party officially now, because Labour has reverted to the position that actually it maintained while Jeremy was leader on the right-wing shadow health secretaries. But sorry, I'm veering off a bit.
That's fine. I mean, the broad topic at the minute is, how can we achieve success outside of Parliament, given that inside of Parliament's a bit of a dog's breakfast at the minute. So you're on topic with that. So give us, with specifically on public services in the NHS, then, if you like, how do we organise for that to actually defend what's left, because it's not happening on a parliamentary level.
It's not. So I mean, I think in terms of sorry, I'm just going to rearrange the light here a bit. Well, Unison and Unite in particular, I mean, Unison has its current leadership, the right-wing leadership, has not played a neutral role in this. I mean, Christina McAnear told Tory conference in 2011 that Unison wouldn't stand in the way of hospital closures and reconfigurations, which I find puts my hair up on end when I just remember that. But it's because they continued attacks on the health service that were happening under Blair, and what we've had since the 2010, or particularly since 2014, has been Blair advisors, Blairites working with Tories, running the quangos that have been given the powers over the health service outside of scrutiny, and so there's this ICS thing with this integrated care, which means paying incentives to reduce the care that people get. That Unison is actively, its right-wing leadership has been actively participating in installing that. In fact, all the NHS unions have signed up to a mechanism, perhaps Bonnie will remember what it's called right now, that is part of the process. They're being basically co-opted. So it would be really great to hear about a break from that with, no pressure from the left NEC, because at the moment it sounds like everybody agrees that integration is a good idea, but that integration means giving people incentives to cut our services, and we don't want that. So yeah, I mean, Frank Dobson, the first health secretary under Blair, said at some point during the Blair years, look at what New Labour is doing to the health service. The Tories agree with it. So he said at the time, join Keep Our NHS Public, which was just forming against, it's outside Parliament, and it's kind of like that. But really, it's all the forces that we can muster to say that the service is supposed to be there to cover everything for everyone, and not paying people to take that away, which is essentially what this integrated care thing means. Yeah, I won't blab on too much right now, but that's what I'm throwing in.
Steve, you're on mute.
Sorry, we're just trying to isolate a noise issue. So, yeah, so Bonnie, you're a big NHS campaigner. Let's bring you in on that one as well.
Yeah. Well, just to go back on the £15 an hour point, that was one of the spark points in Keir's speech to conference, obviously a couple of weeks ago, and that was just after the Bakers Union decided to disaffiliate. A lot of people in the audience were really angry, actually, that Keir effectively asked us all to stand up and clap for the carers once again. Now, we were already fooled by that last year when the Tories asked us to be on our doorstep at 8 o'clock clapping for carers. Unfortunately, clapping doesn't pay the bills, and there is no way that I think you can justify paying anybody in this current climate less than £15 an hour. I think it's really shameful that the leader of the Labour Party didn't actually stand up and say, yes, we are backing this. We want to make sure that everyone can afford heat, eat and housing. These are just basic fundamental human needs. We all have to have them. If you're working hard, you deserve to be paid for it. So that was very, very frustrating. Did you want me to comment as well on the NHS matters, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, whatever you feel is relevant on the broad topic, really.
Yeah, well, obviously a lot of the people, particularly carers who are on, several of them are on under £9 an hour, looking after our most vulnerable people, whether they're disabled, elderly, or they have other issues, is completely unacceptable. What we're seeing as well is, obviously, I've seen a lot of commentary in the last few days about a shortage of nurses. Well, part of that will be because we're simply not paying enough, much like the lorry drivers. If the pay's too low, you're not going to attract people. And quite honestly, it seems like a lot of the NHS and a lot of politicians treat nursing as a vocation. Well, it is a vocation. It's a very, very tough job for anybody to do. And, we shouldn't just talk about nurses. We need to talk about the caterers, the cleaners, everyone else that's involved in looking after patients in a hospital or in a medical setting. It is a vocation, but a vocation alone doesn't feed the family. And they're being taken advantage of in much the same way that, teachers have been taken advantage of and other key workers. And we've realised in the last year quite who our key workers are. They need to be paid. And the removal of the nurses' bursary has been another impact, and cut the number of people that are considering going into nursing as a career. There's just attack after attack on people that we need the most, who are being paid the least. And it's quite shameful that our party at the moment isn't doing what it needs to be doing. So I've got to say to everyone, if you're not already in a trade union, please find out which union will represent you. Go to the TUC website and they'll help you find which union is most likely to be able to help you. But do join one, because there will be one out there for you. If our politicians aren't going to do it, then we'll have to make sure that our trade unions do.
100%. Paul, Unison's one of the biggest representatives in the health sector. I mean, what I guess that, I mean, I have heard the union be criticised in the past for not being kind of militant enough in that sector, really. So, I mean, what can people in the union do? What can people outside the union do to support you guys in actually having more of an impact in protecting services?
Well, the mood in the health service, and I'm not a health service worker, but the mood in the health service is totally fed up. Absolutely. You can only work at top whack for so long. You can't do it. You can't give it all the time. It's not possible. And in Wakefield, where I live, where the health service is the second biggest employer after the council, that isn't an area where female people go to work to get a decent standard of living and a decent pension. But not just well-paid people, or the median wage 31 grand. I once had a conversation with a priest about why he wanted cleaning to stay in house in schools, because he says the constituents of his church, the council and the hospital was one of the few places where a low-paid worker could get the minimum, the living wage, could get a pension and decent sick pay, and that's what it's all about, isn't it? And one of the best quotes I ever read were from Noam Chomsky, when he said, look, the world is splitting between 1% who own it, 94% who work in it, and 4% who get really well paid to tell you that the 1% should own it, and that's how it should be.
Yeah.
And that's the health service. That's what it's about. The health, it is bleeding money, the health service, into the private sector. Absolutely bleeding it. Money's going straight out of the taxpayer, straight through the coffers of the Treasury, and straight into private companies. People are paying the taxes to be cared for themselves, the children, the parents. And I at least in the health service, you know what people are getting paid. I'm telling you now, I talk to ordinary people. I know people who are getting £4 and £5 an hour, cash in hand, because it affects credit if they work more hours. They lose this or they lose that. I know people who getting the minimum wage would be adding 50% to the salary. Because, a bloke told me this when I first became a shop steward. He says, Paul, health and safety is not as important as good wages and full employment. I said, why? I says, because, he says, if your job's not safe or you're being mistreated and there's full employment and good, you just go to another job. I've known blokes get 3 or 4 jobs in a day in the 1970s. Didn't like it, left at dinner time, got another job at afternoon. If you're getting £4 or £5 an hour and you're being bullied and victimised and you get threatened with eviction by landlords who can do what they want, you just stay there, don't you? You put up with anything. And, in Wakefield, in the pits, people worked in 3 pits in a week. They just left if somebody was shouting at them or bullying them. We need to talk about full employment on good wages. You've got to be really careful. Some of these arguments around the EU, for example, some rich people just want some low-paid people to come and stack some shelves for them. That's what they want. When they talk about we want to bring people in from the EU, they're not saying we want to bring them into well-paid jobs, well-skilled jobs, well-financed jobs. They're saying we want you to do this. I heard a farmer the other night saying it's so bad on my farm that some of my relatives are having to come and pick vegetables. Because it's below them. The profit from it is all right, but doing the work is something different. And the mood in the health service, and I don't work in the health sector, and it's sort of semi-independent union. It controls its own policies on pay, and as it should do. Those who work in it should do. I believe in a lay-led union. But they've come to the brink. People can't work as hard as they have been doing. And everybody's waiting now for another outbreak or a bigger outbreak. That's what's coming. In the winter, that's the fear. The fear is we're not, the government don't want to come out of, don't want to go back lockdown, but that's where we're going to be going. And I think it's an explosive situation in the health service. I bet you 50% of the people who are eligible to retire are considering retirement. They're trying to get out, or they're trying to get out into the private sector. who don't want to be. You can't blame them. There's only, if you've been, I've seen this, and I'll finish on this. I've seen people who are trained as outreach workers on, in hospitals, or go to people's houses or work on ankle and knees. They've been transferred into the intensive care unit and dealing with deaths on a daily basis. You've got to have a mentality and a training to deal with those sort of things. You can't just forcibly redeploy people on that basis. And if I had one word, what we need to have, humanity. There's no humanity. How little can I get you to work for? How long can I get you to do it? And in the council, I'll give you an example. There's no fire and rehire on the bins. There's nobody doing that. Do you know why? Because everybody's got 10% more houses. Nobody's happy not to have the bin emptied. So they just bully them and speed them up. You don't need fire and rehire if you get more work out of them for less money with less people. And nobody's talking about it, either. Nobody's talking about the real issues facing working people, unless you're a trade unionist and a politician who actually goes out and meets them and has some idea how they live. How long does Parliament sit in a year? 26 weeks? £89,000 for 26 weeks? There's some jobs that you wouldn't get £89,000 if for 4 people to be doing them jobs. And that's how you reconnect with politics. How can Ian sit? I don't want to point at you, and I apologise if I think I've stood on your toes, Ian. But how can Ian connect to his members with his paying affiliation into a Labour Party that's saying £15 an hour is too good for you? Well, I think we should be saying that's £15 an hour is what MPs get. I tell you what, they'll be clamouring to raise their wages then. And that's what's got to take place. The humanity and the connect. Got to understand what people, there's people at health service on £250,000, £300,000 a year telling people that they're not working hard enough. It's a sick joke.
Yeah,
Ian?
that's, sorry.
Go on, Bonnie.
No, I was just going to say, I wanted to pick up on a couple of points that Paul made there, which are really, really relevant. The NHS is, or at least it was, the largest employer in this country. And for every pound spent in the NHS, it generates, I think, £6 more for the wider economy, because people who work in the health service, guess what? Spend the money in the local shops, and that increases demand, and that builds jobs in manufacturing and so on. So it is a massive false economy to cut down the money and to keep low the amount of money that employers pay, particularly in the health service. But the other thing is, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and if people are working full time in stressful jobs and their mental health is being impacted, and they are forced onto poverty wages, and I would say anything under £15 an hour effectively is a poverty wage. We've seen levels of child poverty in this country go absolutely through the roof, to the point that footballers have to demand the government feed our kids at school or during the school holidays. But the trouble is, if you've not got a livable income, it's going to impact the quality of food that you and your family get to eat, which impacts health. It will impact the quality of housing, which impacts health, which impacts your ability to go out and carry on working. So actually, it's a massive false economy. There's no logical sense in it. And again, this is a job that we need to be active, not just belong to a trade union, but get active in your trade union to put the pressure on, because it seems like Westminster's not interested in fighting for working class people.
Well said, Ian. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think Paul hit it on the head. Actually, most of the comments he made. The things that I would add to what Paul was saying is, I think what we're realising when you go into the shops and when you get your new council tax bill, when you get you're increasing your rent, when you see that the price of credit's going up. I think the idea that these are all driven by high wages. I think people can see that was now a myth, and the reality was about keeping pay low, was about keeping us under control. It was about maintaining us and keeping us in our place to destroy collective bargaining and the collective bargaining agenda, because the aim is obviously, if Tony Benn used to talk about, didn't you, make people a wage slave, and that way they have no option but to work for whatever they can get. And I mean, that seemed to be the ideology behind Thatcherism that was kept on by Blair. And I think what we've tended to do on the left, and certainly, you know, from a Labour Party point of view, is believe that all of the things that we need to see change will only happen in Westminster. And, you know, history shows us that's never been the case, you know. I mean, we've never changed anything in Westminster that hasn't been brought about by first taking direct action, by taking strike action, by forcing politicians into a position where they have no option but to make those decisions and then to bring the legislation. In fact, what's happened is they've passed legislation that's oppressed people, you know, over the centuries. I mean, you just take a look at, you know, our relationship in 1902. You know, 500,000 people being fed in London by the King, King Edward VII. You know, 500,000 kids being fed by a footballer. The only thing that's changed is it's no longer a member of the royal family. It's a private individual doing it. But it's still taking an individual to do it because people in Westminster have failed us. They haven't made the changes that we were supposed to have. And every time we've made progress, you know, they've then withdrawn that progress from us too. We shouldn't just be talking about wage earners either. I mean, we have to talk about, you know, the people, you know, that they use to scare us to say, look, if you don't accept this low pay, then we'll put you on benefits. And when you go on benefits, you know, they tell us 1 minute it's, you know, people are living a life of luxury until those people actually find out that they're not living a life of luxury. People who have to care for their elderly relative, you know, they should be on a minimum wage. You know, why shouldn't people who are taking that responsibility off the state be given a wage to be able to do that role, to support that individual, you know, even if it is a member of their family? We need to go back to the idea of community and what Paul was talking about earlier about humanity. Because, you know, the reality is every penny that they spend is ours. It's not theirs. It's, you know, but we somehow legitimize their ability to spend our money on things that we don't need and we don't want. You know, but the reality is we shouldn't allow ourselves to believe that Westminster is the only place that politics can change. Actually, where Westminster fails us, if we understand our strength, can make real change. But we have to understand that takes organising. You know, that takes a collective response. That takes standing up for one another. That takes recognising who's responsible for our hardship, who sold off all the council houses, who privatised the NHS. You know, who was it that said it's okay to bring in 0 hours contracts? The business lobby, you know, which is very powerful, it's coordinated and it's organised, and it wins because of its collective power and collective strength. And to restrain that, to bring balance, then we as a people have got to collectively organise and recognise in a workplace that comes from a trade union, and in the community it comes from organisations that support the aims and objectives of the people that live in them, that demand proper council housing and says, you know, affordable houses are great if you're on wages that mean you can buy it, but if you're not on a wage that can buy it, then we need council housing, so we're not having to, you know, go cap in hand to a poverty landlord, you know, that's charging us high rents, and normally those places are, you know, not even adequate for people to live in, you know. So I think this is what we need to understand again and go back to understanding, you know, our strength is when we stand together, and it's solidarity.
Well said. We like to field questions from the viewers as much as we can. This is an interesting one from Kay Smith. How do we get the power to create the narrative for a change in wages and employment, given that we haven't really got a parliamentary voice at the moment, particularly with the current setup? So who wants to come in on that one first? Nico, you got any thoughts?
I could throw some out. I'll just throw whatever comes up. But yeah, how do you create a narrative without being, you know, a coherent body? And you're talking about, Ian, about, you know, coming together and organizing as you know, the first step really. You know, I think through the actual fights, the people who are involved in the fights, getting heard, the people who are not involved in the fights being in solidarity with them, hearing what the real demands are, amplifying those demands. That's what occurs to me. That's so any use. But that's how the narratives that we need, I think, should be generated from people who are actually involved and who know what we need.
Demo, we haven't given you much of a word yet, and you're not normally quiet. So
no, I've been quiet for nearly 40 minutes. I mean, it's almost unheard of, isn't it? Really? Yeah, I'm thinking of perhaps just turn the narrative on its head slightly here in response to this point. We keep being told by MPs or employers that, well, we can't afford to give you a pay rise, or we can't pay that sort of money. You aren't worth that sort of money. Well, how about we go to the shops and say, well, I want this much shopping. I can't afford to pay what you're asking. So how about we give you half instead? Or how about we go to our landlords? Because most of us are renting these days. Who the heck can afford to buy a house anymore? As if you're lucky enough to have a home at all. But you go up to your landlord and say, well, I can't afford to pay that. I'll give you half. You'll have to have that. It doesn't work that way, does it? Our wages, our incomes, they can be pushed down, but no, we've got to cough up their exorbitant rents. We've got to pay for the ever-rising prices of our everyday goods and services that are going up and up and up because of the falls up of Brexit that we're having to endure at the moment. Everything we talked about and all the symptoms of Brexit that have been mentioned today, they're actually symptoms of capitalism. Brexit is just accelerating it, really. 98,000 vacancies, I think, are on the NHS now. We can't fill them. HGV crisis. Oh, it's Brexit that's caused it. We've got no more drivers. Hang on a minute. The average age of an HGV driver in this country is 55. This is a decades-long issue we've had with recruiting HGV drivers. Brexit has just accelerated or exacerbated the problem and brought it to people's attention, because actually now things are grinding to a halt a bit with it. It's not good enough, and things have got to move on. And we can't live on Blitz Spirit. We can't live on Special K. We need people that are actually going to. We need tangible incomes. We need to be able to support ourselves. And yeah, fair enough. And I come back to the social contract. I've mentioned it before on shows. A fair day's pay for a fair day's work so that we can afford to put a roof over our heads, food in our kids' bellies. That's what everybody wants. That's what everybody aspires to. That contract is broken. We can't afford to do that anymore on the wages we're getting paid. So those wages are not good enough. So why should we continue to offer our labor if we're not going to get the appropriate remuneration we need just to live, just to get the basics? It's getting worse. And we do need something to rally around and campaign on. And the Westminster bubble is completely failing us at the moment. So absolutely, trade unionism and campaigning in our local communities is exactly the way to go, because frankly, where else left have we got to turn to anymore?
Very good. Who's next?
I think Paul had his hand up there.
Paul, go for it.
Yeah, well, we need to unshackle the unions. We had 13 years of a Labour government and we didn't replace one bit of legislation, one bit of anti-trade union legislation. In 1981, and if a nurse came and stood outside a pit in Wakefield, they didn't go in. That was the dispute over the health service in 1981. And to do it, we've got to tell the truth. You can witter on about this border in the Irish Sea, the EU border in the Irish Sea. We need a border in the Atlantic to the Cayman Islands and the Bahamas. We need a border to stop all the money flying over to these tax havens. You've got to. I don't know a single capitalist that believes in capitalism. Now, they don't want tendering, they don't want competition, they want monopoly contracts given to them at the parties from people they went to public school with. That's what they want. We should start telling the truth. There is no capitalism. There's just corruption that awards contracts out of public taxes. That's what there is. And we need to talk about the real things in life. We don't need food banks. We need free school meals for everybody. What massive change would that make to people if people knew we've got parents going hungry to feed their own kids. If we fed the kids, perhaps they could eat as well. And so we need to talk the truth. I tell you what we ought to do. We ought to print the menu from the House of Commons and the cost of the meals there and the cost of alcohol there, and print that and show it to what prices of people are paying in their own private lives. And there's not enough people who's got access to the media who's saying things like Ian is saying, that this can't go on any longer. And people would flock to that. They would absolutely flock to a party and a trade union. You know, I've worked in local government 40 years. And if I went round tomorrow and tried to recruit young people, it would not be a problem. They might not know what a union is. They might not have grown up in an experienced household. But I tell you who's a problem to recruit: a 52-year-old ex-engineering worker who's a caretaker who has been treated rubbish by the union and doesn't. Well, you can never get that person to join a union. Their experiences have been so bad. So it's not the union, it's what the unions have been doing. And what's happened in recent elections is the union leaders have said, we do want some change. This is not acceptable. And the more you say something's not acceptable, miraculously, you become unpopular in the media. They find something wrong with you. And what's wrong with you is you don't want a seat in the House of Lords and you don't want £100,000 a year. I only want to be on the same wage as the people that I represent. But I want that to be a good wage. The difference is, this is the difference between a good union rep and a bad one. You want to bring everybody up with you, not get out yourself. That is the massive difference. And that's where we've ended up in it. People are trying to be MPs and trade union leaders for the money and not for the change that they can make. And that's what's happening now. The working class people are not stupid. If they see somebody at the top of a trade union movement who looks to be saying to them, I want to improve your living standards or your children's living standards or your care. I don't know anybody who says, I don't think where my parents' care home is, that you shouldn't get £15 an hour. People don't, even Tories think that. The people who don't think it are the people who own the care home. So we should be talking to the people who work in the care home about what their wages are, because the care home wouldn't exist without the financing of the public sector.
Well, your comment there is right in line with Amelia's, who says, you know, when unions visit Westminster, they're not there for the workers. So, I mean, they should be, yeah, no question. So that's a really good point. The other one that came in from the viewers was, if I can find it, here we are. The new health and care bill will enshrine cronyism in the NHS. So that's exactly what you were just talking about, Paul. Nick, I'm going to come to you in a minute because I know you love to talk on this topic. But Ian, you've been a bit quiet. Let's get you into the fight there.
On the narrative issue, I mean, you know, quite clearly, we have just experienced the COVID crisis, and we realise that, you know, those often referred to low-skilled, low-paid workers were the people that got us through that crisis. When, you know, we now know it's just that they're undervalued. You know, they are very skilled workers and they're essential workers, because without them, you know, for example, you know, in the food industry, without those people who worked in the food industry, you wouldn't have been fed. You know, they needed those people to go into work to make sure that the food went into the supermarkets and were able to feed. But yet, 40% of those people, you know, found themselves, while they were putting the food on the plates for other people in this country, found themselves relying on the charity and goodwill of family and friends, because their income was that low, they can't afford to feed themselves and the whole of their family. You know, 7.5% of them had to use food banks. These are people that get the nation fed, essential workers. I mean, we need to change the narrative about the roles that people, you know, in these undervalued jobs do. You know, because they are the people that make sure that the country actually works. And those are the arguments we need to take into the communities. We need to explain to people, you know, which is part of the reasons why our objectives now as a union is to go and set ourselves up in the communities. Is to offer support, offer advice, you know, and connect, you know, with where real politics is done. You know, give advice to people on rents, give advice and support to people on 0 hours contracts, make them aware of a different type of society that we could have if we just understood who was really responsible. You know, it's not a migrant and it never has been. You know, it's been the politicians and the people that buy the lunches that's been responsible for the hardships we suffer. And I think that's what we need to get back into the communities, because that's why people go running to the far right. They believe all of the lies and the smears they hear on the radio, see on the telly, read in the papers, and they believe that they are responsible for causing their difficulties. And we have to explain to them, actually, no. You know, it was legislation that changed and made, you know, council house sign off and stopped people from building new ones. It was government policy that, and you know, enabled, you know, second generation contracts and the introduction of agency workers. And, you know, politicians believe by capping pay, you know, somehow they can control, you know, the inflation in the country. And so that's what they use. They use those control measures to keep us in our place. And somebody needs to tell these people in the community, you know, who is responsible. You know, and that's what we want to go and try and do.
Yes.
Hold MPs responsible.
Nico, couple of minutes, condensed if you can. What that comment that says that the health and care bill is enshrining cronyism in the NHS. Tell us how that's working.
It's sealing in mostly things that have been happening since 2014, and one I want to pick up on in terms of, you know, well-paid jobs is basically restructuring the health service to benefit corporations, and it's not. And Labour called it out under Jeremy Corbyn, while Diane Abbott was Shadow Health Secretary for the Sustainability and Transformation Plans, and then it went kind of quiet. And one of the things it does is gets rid of skilled, well-paid jobs to replace them with cheaper alternatives. And so you have new roles, from some of them imported from the US. I have a friend who went to have a sample taken for cancer, and she would have seen a consultant normally, but actually it was one of these physician's associates. And he said to her, "Oh, if you want to see a consultant, you have to go private now." So the guy, you know, it's not about that person and their, you know, it's not about them not doing their job. It's about the fact that they're creating a system where you don't have those well-paid jobs. Patients suffer, staff suffer, and I haven't heard any unions speak out against it. And you know, I'm just saying this is one of the aspects. How do you deal with that as a union? And it's only now coming into law, but this has been policy since 2014. So there's a lot of catching up to do in terms of us facing up to what all these policies are that have just been sort of wiped out from they're just not talked about in the mainstream.
We have two union officials on the program tonight. I mean, lads, what do you know, how do people get their union most effectively to come out against this kind of stuff and actually draw people's attention to it?
There's only one way to do it. That's to succeed. And part of my manifesto when I stood to be the General Secretary was that we should pick 3 care homes in every local authority in Britain and concentrate the resource, not in London, concentrate the resources on them 3 care homes outside, leafleting, get the full-time officers there, explaining what's going on the streets, in the rain, under the brollies, whatever it is, and say, we've achieved this, we've got parity with local authorities or well-paid employers, and we've done it in them 3 homes. Now we're going to the next 10 and the next 15 after that. Got to get out on the streets, got to get away from it. Stuff is not achieved for working class people by lobbying people in suits. The money flows the other way on that. The money flows to the people with suits. We need to talk to the, you know, you want to see the average age of people working in care homes, you know, and as the bus services deteriorate, these people can't get back. They're on shift work. They can't get there and back. I'm sure Ian finds that in the industries that he represents. And we need to give, I hate this management uses this term all the time, I don't know how I'm going to use it, a holistic approach. You know, we need cheap public transport, free school meals, who's going to campaign against that? If they do want to campaign against it, they can come off and be represented by somebody who wants to campaign for our class. And that is what politics is about now, isn't it? It's not a sideshow. It's about, do people eat? Do people get an holiday? You know, people say, oh, we want the coronavirus to be over with so we can go on holiday. What they're going to go on holiday with? What money have they got to go on holiday with? What we ought to be creating among people is HOPE. Not careerism, but hope.
Amen to that, buddy. Got a thought on it?
Yeah, I mean, there's not much more that you can say than that. But the bottom line is, obviously, I think a lot of politicians perhaps could do some reading of the Labour Party's history. Obviously, the Labour Party was originally founded by a number of trade unions. The Bakers was one of them, to be the parliamentary arm of the trade union movement. And that is what brought power. There's a quote that says, power concedes nothing without demand. The bottom line is, if we want things to be better, we just have to get together and demand that things are better. Women didn't get the vote because a few MPs were lobbied. Women got the vote because they made it happen. We need to also be pushing to extend the franchise for voting to, I would say, to 16-year-olds. If you pay tax, you can have a vote. I think we need to start making sure that people are more involved in the democracy of where they live. And that means parliamentary and that means political, but it also means getting active in your trade union and start making your demands. The trade unions won us weekends and bank holidays and all these things, rights to health and safety, rights to equality, all these really important things, as well as better rates of pay and better protections in your job. But we need to be asking for more, and a union is only as strong as the members are. So people need to get active, work together, agree a set of priorities within their trade union, in their workplace, and start making the demands. Because at the end of the day, millionaires don't make their money. The workers, the ordinary people, make the money for the millionaires. And we need to shift the balance more than a little bit there.
Brilliant, Deborah. We haven't given you much time through the programme, and we're going to try and wind up on time tonight, because I know Nico, at least, and maybe some others have things they've got to get to. But give us your last 5 minutes there on...
Yeah, I mean, I can only really echo the sentiments that Paul and Bonnie have just laid out, really. I suppose, as far as getting involved and making sure that you're getting the representation that you deserve, that you want, the people that are going to represent you and fight for the causes that mean a lot to you. And right now, there's an awful lot that ordinary working class people really, really need from representatives of them. Get involved in the trade union movement. Do what Bonnie said at the start of the show, go onto the TUC website, decide which union best fits your own wants and desires and needs, and join up with them. And if they're an affiliated union to the Labour Party, I would start asking, why are you funding this party that was set up as the trade union arm of the or the political arm of the trade union movement, even when it's woefully poor at doing that these days. It simply isn't representative of ordinary working class. It's representative of an elite again. They're not interested in giving us a wage we can live on. They're not interested in giving us working policies that are going to benefit our working lives, or a decent quality of life to live anymore. They're not representative of anything at all. They don't stand for anything. So yes, get involved in your trade unions. Yes, get involved in your local communities. But ask these questions. If you're part of an affiliated body, if your local MP is a Labour MP, ask them, what on earth are they doing for you? What are they pushing in Parliament to actually help you these days? Because they're not doing very much for us. And frankly, if they're not going to do anything for us, except turn on their own members and turn on themselves, then frankly, they're not worthy of our support any longer, and we need to build up elsewhere.
Well said. Right. So we've got 3 minutes left, and who wants to get a last word in then on the programme, seeing as Dan has had his say?
Can I just throw in a quick comment? Tony Benn, one of his best quotes, and I always love to quote Tony Benn because somehow a lot of his quotes remain absolutely relevant today. But Tony Benn said he was leaving Westminster so that he would have more time for politics. Does that ring true for you in your union there, Ian?
Absolutely. we're going to do a lot more politics now. I mean, you know, we will build alliances. We will work to make the changes that people want. I mean, one of the things that people will know about the Bakers Union is, you know, obviously in 2014, you've probably heard me say it before. In 2014, we were a bunch of extremists for daring to say people should be having £10 an hour. We should abolish 0 hours contracts, and young people shouldn't be discriminated by being paid less. I mean, in 2017, in 2019, they all became mainstream political policies. You know, I mean, even the Tories were vying around like a £9.50 minimum wage in 2015. You know, and we only started the campaign in 2014. I mean, so the reality is that, you know, our union is a campaigning union. You know, and we will just be even more political, because instead of wasting our money on a party that doesn't represent the interests of working class people, we will put that money into where it needs to be. And we will train activists, and we will develop activists, and we will send them out in those communities to build political power for us.
Brilliant. Well, I'm going to take the last minute then, because one thing we haven't gone into much detail on in the programme is the treatment that Paul here, who's received a lot of praise for the sense he's talking from people watching the programme, the way he's being treated by Unison and by Kirklees Council, who are doing everything they can, it seems, to stop him from actually taking up his elected role as president. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on all that, but there is a process ongoing at the minute where they seem to be trying to leave Paul out of the union altogether to prevent him from doing his job on behalf of the members who elected him. There are a number of other hearings remaining, and you will find on Squawk Box and on the Squawk Box and Socialist Telly social media feeds that you know, the details of the various protests, which have been fantastically attended in support of Paul, with loads of people from all over the country testifying to the massive impact he's made on their behalf in their industrial situations, etc. So, you know, solidarity with Paul, and you know, if you can possibly get to one of those or join it online when the next one is publicised, make sure you do, because we have to send a message to employers and unions that you know, the victimising a rep is utterly unacceptable, and, you know, leaves every other rep in the union out on a limb if they're not properly protected. And you know, on that note, we'll close. But, you know, the union movement is going to be one of the keys to the future if this country is going to get any better. If you're not in one, join one, and if you are in one, make sure you don't just join, but you get involved. And on that note, we'll end for this week, and keep your eye out for the rest of the Socialist Telly programming through the week, and for Squawk Talk next week and going forward. Thanks a lot, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your week.